Fat Boys, the midway point has now left us. We are officially in the back stretch, although just early days into it. Week 8 gave us a whole lot to look at. Definitely some green in terms of our Yahoo predicteds and some scores to be had, but not always from the positions that you'd expect. In fact, NFL was celebrating a holiday that benefited some of us and not so much other of us. So without further ado, let's get right to that story and then on to our scores. The bridge between Week 8 and Week 9 is riddled with holidays. Week 8 on the Sunday was actually National Tight End Day for all those who celebrate. And don't just think it's a way for NFL to sell t-shirts, although it probably is, because this particular year, unless I'm mistaken, tight ends had more receptions on one day than any other day in NFL history. And I'm sure that will come up when the next segment when I go through our scores, because a lot of people definitely had some of those tight ends in their starting roster, and even a few of us might have had them on their bench. But I'm actually recording this on Halloween, which is why it's a little bit delayed. Not delayed as it was last week when I actually woke up early in the morning on my week off to do it, but, normal delayed, where this is going to get probably right before I go to bed. So every week I say this, I'm going to try and be a little shorter. Let's see if I can actually do it this time. I have an outside shot because there's only one real story or real thing I wanted to kind of talk about, partially due to our 1 versus 2 draft matchup with Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels. And if you did watch the game was all right, kind of a dud at times, and definitely great if you had a field goal kicker in it. But obviously, if you watch the last minute or even the last 30 seconds, seeing 2 touchdowns back to back at that style, great because it showed the kind of different offenses, the different strengths of the quarterbacks, and then was just super cool when you see a Hail Mary flukily actually work out. But that is kind of the trend of this year, where Caleb Williams is doing all right given what he has, but he is still a pretty young quarterback. I mean, not just the first year part, but the actual age part. But then there's Jayden Daniels, who's getting way more hype, actually kind of being a little bit more successful in terms of a total complete quarterback package, but that's partially to do with his fantasy value. But both are actually on pretty successful teams when they weren't supposed to be. Now, it also gave us a lot of funny memes. If you watch Tyreek Stevenson actually mocking the crowd and kind of taunting them before he went and tipped it back to the actual receiver himself. Now, that's something I personally as a coach will probably be using just for following the ball, not paying attention to where you should be, not sticking to assignments, and then just maybe don't taunt. But all that stuff aside, that was super exciting. Gave us a bunch of the memes of the reactions. Obviously, Jayden Daniels was thrilled, as was Washington. Caleb Williams started screaming, apparently at himself, but also at others. So great stories all around. But digging back to a point I made a few weeks ago, it does also highlight just the different strategies teams have right now with their young quarterbacks. This is probably perfectly highlighted by the announcement that Anthony Richardson was going to get benched for Joe Flacco. Now, some people panicked and say now they're selling the farm so quick with this young rookie quarterback. And remember, he is not just young. He is the youngest starting quarterback as far as I know. But also, he's only played or started 13 collegiate games, and then this is his 10th NFL game. So they knew he was even young on that comparison. But they did blow a top 4, top 5 pick. It was top 4, I think, last year. So they are kind of invested, and that is something I talked about before. Do we have these older quarterbacks coming in that know more complex systems, but they're a bit older? Or do we get the young quarterbacks who need extremely simple systems, but maybe have that athleticism? Now, with Richardson, it's a bit weird because he got hurt so much. They're not really running him as much as they used to, which was kind of the point with him because he sure really can't throw right now. But we see this as compared to Jordan Love, who sat as a backup forever. But that's actually less kind of important to me. It is more the financial decision. And sometimes it's not really backwards. This year, if you had a first-year quarterback, it's probably working out pretty well for you. Even Bo Nix, technically, while I don't think anyone would argue he's lighting the league on fire, even in fantasy value, he was kind of a better pick so far than Mahomes. Now, he's not a better quarterback then, and it's very matchup based. Let's be honest, Denver's been very fortunate about who they've been playing, so that is destined to change. But a lot of these guys are stepping in and being successful right now with the base systems. Now we'll see with the more complicated defenses start hitting them, how they kind of fare. But I also think it matches when I say economic market. Obviously, anytime you have Dallas plays San Francisco, there's a reason San Francisco is pushing it so much to try and get people back and not really care and still push to move forward. A team with their kind of injuries you think might be on the selling end of things or starting to calm it down, but they kind of can't, right? The stat comes up every year that former Mr. Irrelevant Brock Purdy makes in an entire season what Dax Prescott makes in a quarter. It's not quite, but it's only under $100,000 off, which is pretty exceptional. So if you think about trying to sign one of these major guys, it actually has a massive shift on your whole organizational structure. So sure, you can spend all this money on your quarterback or a big running back, or you can go cheap, go young, go new on the guaranteed rookie contracts, and maybe actually build up your defense a little bit and actually be a competitive team. It's hard to say. I mean, realistically, us on the fantasy end, not all of us in these pools are actual football fans. So we kind of just want high points and high value. But realistically, I don't think the NFL cares about actually making a great product. I mean, they mainly pitch to a lot of Americans who will still support something, even if it doesn't really represent them or they actually enjoy it anymore. Which I don't think on this particular week I have to elaborate too much more on. Anyway, we're going to jump to the scores. Let's see how I did in terms of timing, but more importantly, let's see how we all did in Week 8. In a matchup that at times was actually closer than the score eventually ended up to be. If you were watching, Olave kind of got force-fed the ball at one point when the quarterback change happened. But ultimately, I think we can point to Jake's consistency in the running back game. He had the running backs 5 and I think 6. Gibbs was just behind there, and a solid defense. Or was our defense too, and just kind of enough to get by. Even though his wide receivers were underperforming, his quarterback finally Mahomes did something that was over predicted. On Will's side, you kind of got a feel for him. Sure, he had the defense 4, and obviously not a huge point difference there. Did enough in the intangibles. Kai Williams had a great game, but QB1, and I think we can all see where I'm going with this. Having a bagel and a 0.8 had essentially a wide receiver almost 0. That's not going to cut it for you. Now you were 16 points off, and Higgins was actually hurt just before. But if you take a look at your bench, yep, you had some people you could put in. Or if there's a few things that could have happened differently, maybe you kind of pop through. So unfortunate for you, fortunate for Jake, because as we're going to see in a moment, the former number 1 was kind of on the way down, so Jake now takes our top spot. Will, you're in that mix again, right in the middle. You're having a pretty bad luck, and in fact, I think you've pointed out a couple times to me, one of the best things to do in this pool is play you, because then apparently you'll go on fire. You are certainly letting up a ton of points. So you're not out of it yet then. That can change just as easily as not. And 111 was enough to probably be competitive in a few other matchups we have. But all hail our new leader, not just for the week, but currently for the whole regular season. Well done, Jake. Horst continues by overshooting his Yahoo predicteds by a fair bit. He's done this for the last little while with only a couple little hiccups. Of course, he was against Ben, who had certainly his chances, which we're going to take a look at. Now, granted, on Monday night, there was Pickens, and Horst was down a little bit. He didn't need a full outing, and he sure managed to squeak through. He also had Jacobs, who was our running back 2, and actually on his bench, if we really want to take a look, was our running back 3. So things could have been even a little bit better than it looked, but Horst, I wouldn't complain too much. Ben, it did kind of slip away there. Obviously, having a few underperformances. Trey McBride was a good performance for you, though. You did have the tight end 5. CeeDee Lamb was our wide receiver 1. Detroit was our defense 1. So you had a lot going for you, but you can't just have a bagel and running back. I mean, you only lost by 3.6, just under 3.5 and change. And we see here that you definitely had someone over 3. You also had Puka Nacua, who came back and was a huge impact. Although in the wide receiver market, you didn't need it a whole lot. In fact, he only really would have been an improvement on your now IR receiver in Diggs. So I don't think it's going to take too much of a strain to see where your depth's going to come from there. We're going to see that 3 and 5 is certainly not out of the woods, but obviously no time like the present to make a move. Gavin, you're only 2 wins above him, but you're 6 places above him, which is even more important. That's partially due to, as I said, you have been overachieving points-wise, and in the end, that does add up. Speaking of an overperformance, I just overshot, which is actually even more impressive if you consider how long Love lasted in the game. He did get knocked out, which impacted me fairly significantly. I did have a running back one in Cook, and our Denver defense here, or the Denver defense, was number 5 overall. Other than that, just kind of a steady stream of points. I finally had some people snap out of some funks. And on my bench, I'm still nursing some injuries, but obviously my quarterback change probably would have helped me out. As would have Chaz's, because he had some quarterback issues as well. His wasn't hurt, his just wasn't that good. Although he was good at making faces at the end, I'm not going to make fun. That was a devastating loss. You're an actual Chicago fan, and I think you let us know in the chat group. That's pretty much on par with everyone I know from Chicago that was feeling that one. On the plus side, Achane has back now, and with the offense up and going, he was a great point getter for you. He was our RB4 on the week. You actually didn't have that many underperformances. It really was your kind of circle here. The fact that Caleb couldn't do it against Washington's defense when so many other quarterbacks have, but the Lockett and the Mason underperformances, they weren't just underperformances, they were near bagels, and that's just going to kill you. So this could have been a lot tighter, and you, like I said, now you're in 10th spot, but you weren't far removed from being quite competitive, and it's not like you're not scoring points on a weekly basis. You just can't wait too many more weeks. As for me, I really needed that win to kind of cling on with my just fingernails right now to the playoffs. I'm going to still have to go on a run because this is certainly not going to do it in the end. Another tight one with a just under 3-point differential. Justin, you managed to hang on against B, and this was actually quite an important matchup, obviously, because as you can see here, this evened the score at a couple teams now at 500. Both teams are playoff contenders right now. So Justin, you took the win. We'll take a quick look at how now. Bateman was a pretty significant underperformance, and actually, you had a few people that were kind of dancing around that, but just enough to get you through. You were definitely celebrating National Tight End Day. He was our tight end 4, and it was our kicker 5, but actually our kicker 2, because most of the kickers this week did not necessarily live on any of our teams. You did just enough, though. You were well over predicted. I think Lamar helped with that. I think Taylor coming back helps with that, but obviously Kelsey overshooting by a lot and your kicker overshooting by a lot certainly helps out. Now, B, you didn't throw off too much. You were over your predicteds, and like I said, you were almost within 3 here. I think Tank Dell coming back really helped you. Swift was not actually having a great game. I'm sure you were watching that game, but he busted out for that huge touchdown run, which saved the day. You did also have Kittle, who was once again one of the people that we were looking at celebrating National Tight End Day. I think he was our tight end 3 overall. More being your kind of big underperformance, other than your intangibles down here. Had things gone a bit differently there, that may have helped out. But I think the biggest one you can look at, obviously here, you did have the wide receiver 5 on your bench. And that certainly would have helped you out. That would have been more than enough in any of the spots you pretty much could have put him in. So unfortunately, there it was in your fingertips. Fortunately for you, you've had a pretty consistent season, so you're still top 4, or at least tied for it. And Justin, you definitely needed this one. You got it. You're now 500. You know, you can't complain every single week. So, Waylon, in this particular case, there's only 2 teams you would have beaten, and you faced one of them. Mark, this is kind of a fall from grace again. You started off a little bit hotter. You're starting to cool off a little bit, but you are still top 2. You did lose your top spot. And John, you are joining the many of us that are now tied with 4 and 4, just with scoring a little bit lower. I think that's where you're at. So, taking a look at just kind of how you got there, there wasn't a whole lot we can really point to that, you know, actually cracked our top 5. It was just, other than your tight end, again, ironically, pretty consistent. You did have a decent kicker out there in Houston. Other than that, just kind of points all the way through. If we're looking at your bench, dueling Buffalo receivers on the bench, I think that's pretty interesting. Other than that, not a lot to report, although Laporta certainly would have helped you out. But no one who cracked the top 5 in any way, shape, or form there. Scooting over to Mark, I think you're in a bit of an interesting spot. You did actually have a tight end who cracked, who was our tight end 2, so way to celebrate the day. But obviously having your quarterback now being the person I mentioned being bench, so you're going to have to find a little bit of depth. You don't quite have someone on the bench now, so I'm assuming you're going to be making a pickup. Other than that, again, you weren't massively under. You just needed 1 or 2 guys to really go off for you. It just didn't happen. So you live to play another day, and you're still top 2. John, as we're going to see in a second, you're one of the many tied at 500, so every week's going to matter from here on out. I've alluded to it a couple times. We see our 4 through 7 here. So John's on the outs right now. If we ended today by only 13 points, he wouldn't make the playoffs, but a lot's going to change there. And especially considering here, we're all within a couple wins of each other, still pretty tight. I did mention the 3 and 5s. You're only a game out, and some of you have actually outscored some of us. So in fact, Will, you've outscored more of us. If you were 4 and 4, you'd be the leading 4 and 4. So that was actually quite a big round this week. Ben, a little bit lower in the scoring, but still not out of it. And Chaz, you have been scoring actually relatively well. You just kind of need to go on the run. So certainly no one's out of it, but no time like the present. Speaking of the present, let's look at week 9. Now that's a big one. We've got a couple of 4 and 4 matchups all here. So obviously at least some of us are going to 5, whereas some of us will stay at 4. More the 2 people who kind of need this win now. So that should be an interesting matchup. And then we've got our top kind of tier here. I think this is going to be the match of the week. 1 versus 3, only a game off. When we take a look at scores, it's one where if Kev wins, he actually would end up passing Jake in terms of the overall score, because obviously if he wins, he's there, so he knows he's gaining a spot, so that means this one's pretty pivotal. It also means this matchup with Mark and Ben can come into play, because Mark could actually make his way back to the top spot if things break his way, or he could fall even lower, and then we'll see where he ends up. So a lot to happen in week 9. As always, this is the peak of our back 9, and just the end of the season is about to get started. Week 9 is going to hit us right away, Fat Boys. Now, we do go back to some bye weeks, and you know that if you have any Steelers or if you have any 49ers, you probably have already started to make some of your moves. Thursday night game approaches us pretty quickly, so hopefully we're ready for a real barn burner. They're really definitely putting some teams that I don't know if they're quite the draw now that maybe they were at the beginning of the year, but hey, a game is a game, and I'll take it when I get up. I'd say the only thing to pay attention to is we all know we're on different time zones right now. I do believe, unless I'm wrong, daylight savings is about to come into play, so do pay attention as to where you live, where your daylight savings are, or in my case, not, and pay attention to any of the time differences, just so you can't get caught off guard. Other than that, as I said in the matchups, everything is going to matter this week, as it has for the last little while, so we could have a very similar looking table next week. Things could totally flip, and playoff destinies could be somewhat starting to etch itself out. Only time will tell, but either way, good luck in week 9, everyone.